everyone. Hello everyone, we're really excited to be hosting this webinar. We all know how important nutrition and hydration are for our dogs, and we keep saying that they're canine athletes because that's what they are. So we are so excited to be bringing to you Katie and Vicky, and they're going to be talking all about, we often do things, but we're not actually quite sure why we do them. So they're actually going to be giving us a little bit of insight and science behind all of this as well, which is going to be amazing.
Definitely. And we've had some fantastic questions in already on the discussion board. So thank you everyone for those. And if you do have any more questions during the webinar, just pop them on the comments on this video. And I'm sure Vicky and Katie will do their best to answer as many of them as they can.
Right, guys, we're going to pass it over to you and let you introduce yourselves.
Lovely, thank you very much. It's a huge privilege to be able to talk to you this evening. Thank you very much. My name is Vicky Marshall. I'm founder of Hug Pet Food. We launched in November last year, which has been quite an interesting time to launch. But I've actually been in pet food manufacture, raw pet food manufacture, since 2009. So quite old. Well, I'm older than I like to think I am. Maybe longer than I like to remember. And this is Katie, and we've worked together probably for a majority of that time as well. So I'm going to hand you over to her expertise for the actual talk itself.
Lovely, yeah. So I'm a nutritionist, and I'll explain a little bit more about who I am in the talk, so you don't have to hear it all twice. But yeah, should we crack on and get going? So
Brilliant.
And then from the beginning. How's that looking, everyone? Hopefully that's all good. Okay, so really interesting topic for me to do this actually. We're going to be looking at two really important facts to help you make the best of your dogs and enjoy running with them. It's such a huge topic that we could probably do a weekend course on, to be fair. So we're going to talk about some of the kind of basic principles today, just to start getting you thinking about what you're feeding and how you're doing it, and maybe just trying to make some little improvements to bring out the best in your dog. So I won't bore you too much about me, but I started a career as a veterinary nurse, which I loved and adored, and learned an awful lot, but then got a little bit of compassion fatigue. It's quite a stressful environment, and actually wanted to concentrate on wellness and health rather than firefighting, the illnesses all the time. I was lucky enough to then go on and study a degree in animal behaviour and physiology. So I did quite a lot about wild species and everything from sort of insects to giraffes, which was a really wonderful 3 years experience, and quite a lot of anatomy and physiology in that as well. I sort of fell into raw food, literally fall into it, but the industry when I had my degree, because it really made me look at animals in a quite a different way. So not just looking at the breeds that we have produced today, but also looking at their evolutionary history and how important that is in their well-being. And I've randomly phoned up Vicky actually, and was very much like, I'm here, this sounds interesting, and I had loads of questions, and was very supported and did a qualification in naturopathy, and loads of research, and now I just enjoy sharing what I've learned and helping owners to really feed the best quality diet they can, and also navigate the pet food industry, because it's an absolute minefield, lots of marketing. So yeah, thank you very much to Vicky and Hug for sponsoring this evening. Hug are a very diverse and open-minded company, so it's about really empowering owners to feed the best quality food, whatever that might be, whether it's raw or whether it's the cold press, just making sure that people have options to feed the best quality foods, and being very honest in the process as well, which is refreshing. So let's kick off a little bit with where nutrition fits into all of this. So the three main aspects that affect your dog's performance are genetics. So we were chatting to Kutra about this earlier on in the week, and how the breed of dog, obviously, it's not just about what they look like, but physiologically they are different too, and they have different requirements and different adaptations. So genetics plays a huge part. Obviously the training, which is where Kushla and Verity come in, but also the nutrition too. It will absolutely affect how your dog performs. And on a side note, a lot of what I talk about tonight is actually really relevant to you as well as runners. So maybe not the literally the meals, but a lot of the theory behind it actually really applies to us too. So it's just something to think about. So exercising your dog, increasing the amount of work that they're doing, does increase the demand on their organ systems and the metabolism. It brings about physiological changes, and it burns up energy. So we are asking more of our dogs, and there's so much research into kind of human sports, and think of all the equipment that we can get and to support us, but quite often, with our dogs, are we really paying enough attention to the demands that exercise is bringing onto them? So hopefully today we'll answer some of those questions. So the main nutrients that your dog food will have in them, or you'll hear about for your dogs, are protein, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, and trace elements. So these are all just put in our dog food, and there's a certain amount of most of those nutrients that you need every day that are essential. But something that we mustn't forget about is water. And I was really pleased when we decided to do this talk on hydration, because it's just, water is just the most important nutrient. You literally will not live without it. It's something definitely not to be overlooked. And to just take a minute and spend some time on the importance of getting that right will make a huge difference to your dog. As always, I was taught this once, and it's always really stuck with me, just to try and get you thinking about hydration. Every cell in the body is about 70% water, and in fact the planet is 70% water, and most natural foods are about 70% water. So if you think about the dry foods that you might feed your dog, or we might be eating toast or something like that, it's that you're kind of dehydrating yourself, because a lot of the way that we take in water should be through our natural food, and 10% of that water circulates around in your blood vessels. It makes up part of your circulation, and the rest of it sits within the cells and the fluids surrounding the cells. So you're pretty much just water. So it's hugely important to acknowledge hydration, and I just wanted you to think about that 70% equilibrium. And we're asking these dogs often to perform and to excel at what they're doing, but we can sometimes be not fueling them with enough water to do so. So what does water do? We know it's important. I've just sort of mentioned that. There's some unusual functions, if you like, of water that you might not have thought of. So it does actually lubricate body surfaces, so joints, etc. It absorbs shock. So if you're fully hydrated, when you're pounding away, it will actually work as a shock absorber, the fluid. It carries electrolytes around the body, so we'll look at that later on during the presentation. But really crucially, it helps regulate body temperature, which is absolutely important when you're doing any kind of exercise. And it also helps with gas exchange in the lungs. So the more hydrated you are, the more lubricated the lung surface is, the better gas exchanges, there's more oxygen, which is more fuel. So it's absolutely important and relevant. It's not just about, oh, my dog's a bit thirsty after it's just run 5K. It actually really makes a huge difference. So how does your dog get water? Kind of obviously, you might think, through its food and through the water that it drinks. Also they do make water when they break down fat and protein. A kind of byproduct of that breakdown is water. But something to think about here, going back to that 70% moisture, is a dry food is somewhere between 8 to 15% of moisture, and more whole food diets, so the raws and sometimes the tins, are sort of 65-70% moisture. So we're much more near to where we should be. which means you're already providing, you know, the fluid without the dog having to go out of its way to drink. And it's really noticeable actually if you feed your dog like a raw diet, how little they do actually drink, because they have like a satisfied equilibrium of water. They don't really feel the need, and it's often a comment that we get when people move over to a raw or a whole food diet. And as a general rule, when I was in veterinary practice, we used to say that we used to do calculations to rehydrate animals, and it's about 50 mils per kilo per day. But it does depend on the food that they're eating and how much activity they're doing. So as a general rule, dogs should be taking in anything from sort of 20 to 70 mils of water per kilogram body weight per day. So it's just a figure that I thought might help you visualize what we're talking about. So that's how they take water in. And how do they lose water then? So obviously through urine, that's an obvious one. Defecation is another one. Something you might not think about is if your dog doesn't have particularly well-formed feces, so it has that kind of you know, sloppy diarrhea, or especially around adrenaline, around a race or something like that, actually they lose quite a lot of water through that process. So that's something to be mindful of. But yeah, also evaporation. So we know that dogs don't sweat like we do through their sort of skin, throughout their body, but they use sort of evaporation through panting to maintain their body temperature. And I thought that this chart was actually really interesting because it just goes to show how much water is lost through panting. So you can see on the left there, you've got the dog sitting around the house. So the majority of that water loss in that dog there is through the urine. And then if you look at the other side of the chart with the distant running dog, you've got actually the majority of water loss in that dog is through respiration and through panting. So yeah, don't underestimate how much fluid is lost by running. You know, it's they have to lose heat. That's the only kind of method for them to do it, and they do that by evaporating water. So yeah, just bear in mind, you know, that it absolutely does have an effect. And I just put the note there that it's kind of a bit sad really, because there's no reservoir. You can't sort of say to your body or to yourselves, right, tomorrow you're going to be running 15k, hold on to the water. You know, you have to kind of look at it every day, and that sort of 12 hours pre-race are really important to try and make sure hydration is at a peak. So it's a daily task. It's something that you need to work on sort of every day. So this was again something that came up when we were talking with Vicky and Kushla the other day. I was sort of talking about becoming aware of signs of dehydration, or how do you know how hydrated your dog is. And there's sort of the classic ways of looking, and the big one, which we used to see in veterinary practice a lot, was loss of skin elasticity. So it's literally if you pinch your skin, I don't know if you can see that at all, but I am quite hydrated, so my skin drops back normally really quickly. And if you have a pretty dehydrated animal, if you squeeze the skin up into a tent, it literally stays there, and that's quite a severe state of dehydration. And also the colour of their urine. So just like us, if they're dehydrated, then their urine will get a darker colour. Dry gums as well, you know, just feeling dry in the mouth. But and also lethargic, or just losing a bit of energy when they're running, that can be a sign of dehydration. And we were discussing that actually, perhaps you guys haven't done that before, or when you're sitting on the sofas with your dogs at home, it was a really good chance to actually get a feel for what is normal hydration. So just, you know, as long as your dog's friendly, putting your finger in the mouth and just having a feel of what a normal kind of normal moisture kind of surface feels like, and then you can compare it if you're ever worried at a later date to that. And we were talking about, actually that led on to talking about things like recognizing normal respiratory rates and heart rate. So that might be something we can show you at a later date, is how to take a resting pulse and a resting respiratory rate, so you know how quickly your dog has got back to kind of the normal. So it's about knowing your dog's normal really. And just to say a little note there, that not to rely on the thirst mechanism. So the thirst drive is something that is a kind of subconscious instinctive drive. But if they're on adrenaline, and I noticed a couple of comments on the Facebook page about worrying that their dogs wouldn't drink after an event, then if they're still on the adrenaline and they're still kind of in that kind of go mode, I talk about this a bit later with food, then their thirst mechanism won't really be kicking in. So they're not going to be kind of thinking about drinking in that moment. And it's more about getting them back to their normal, so their normal heart rate, the normal respiratory rate, and then those kind of processes kick in. So we talk about that a bit more with food, but it's just slightly relevant there. So, okay, big deal. Yeah, okay, my dog's a bit dehydrated, not to worry, it'll drink later, you know. But it's a bit more serious than that, really, and it will really affect performance. So for those of you who are sort of competitive with your running, or even if it's your own personal self, then it will affect the performance. So you actually only need to lose 15% of your water to risk death, and I have seen that sadly in practice, and it's not very pleasant. Heat stroke and exercising dogs in hot weather, and it's been studied in people that actually you only need to lose about 2% of your water before you lose cognitive, which is mental performance, and physical performance. So what that means is your dog can't concentrate and can't focus and can't be with you mentally as well as physically while you're running, just by being mildly dehydrated. And the other 2 points say that mild dehydration limits exercise performance, and that it's the single most important determinant of endurance capacity, are quotes from a research paper on sled dogs, actually, that which I've worked with a bit through Hug, which has been amazing. There's a lot of research in that field, and it has been absolutely proved that water is the most important factor of being able to run an endurance race. So it is absolutely proven. And just to note there that I'm not only talking about water in respect of a hot sunny day in August in the UK. Actually, I don't know what the weather's been like where you are, but here we've recently experienced really cold but really dry weather, and that is also really dehydrating. So we need to kind of move away of thinking, oh, it's hot, my dog needs a drink. It doesn't really matter what the temperature is. If they're running, if they are panting, they're still going to be losing water, even if it's cold. So just to pop that thought in your head. So talking about that, moving through with that. So how does exercise actually cause dehydration? So what happens is a period of long exercise, we lose water through the panting, and then this reduces the amount of that 10% I was talking about at the beginning, the amount of water that's in our circulation. This becomes reduced. And this means that the heart has to work faster and push harder to get the oxygen in the blood and the nutrients around the body. It becomes a bit thicker almost. And that can cause the muscles to have to kind of go from using oxygen as their muscle source to using what we call anaerobic respiration, which you may remember from GCSE biology. So it's producing energy, but by not using oxygen, and that causes an increase in lactic acid. And so this is very relevant for us. So that's why we get cramp, and you can, if you've ever cycled up a hill, you can feel the burn of lactic acid. And so genetically, some dogs are more predisposed to this than others, but it's definitely worth being mindful that your dog can suffer those consequences too. And if you get lots of cramps, then water is something that we should be thinking about. Am I drinking enough? So that's something that that you and your dog share. So it wouldn't be right to talk about water without going through electrolytes too, because electrolytes are carried with water throughout the body. And when we talk about electrolytes, we're talking about sodium, potassium, and chloride mainly. These are all responsible for their balance with water within your body. So the concentration of sodium in your bloodstream will trigger your kidneys to either reserve water or excrete water. So it's really important that we respect these electrolytes and make sure that your body's got enough of them so it can maintain the equilibrium that it needs to. To balance them, it takes energy. So the more we're kind of exercising and upsetting the balance, if you like, by causing a little bit of dehydration, the more energy the body has to use to keep the equilibrium in the body. And they're responsible for things like firing off your nerves and for muscle contraction, so the muscle fiber contraction. So it's really important that we have the right proportion of these in our system. Now, Dogs don't sweat, so we know that for ourselves we lose sodium through sweating, but actually they will lose sodium as well through their saliva, and also in the warmer conditions and in the colder conditions. So if you've ever thought about sharing your electrolyte drink with your dog, you know, what's relevant for us isn't always relevant for them. If you had like an electrolyte solution. There isn't much research into this actually, when you come to look at you know, what we should do and what we should be offering our dogs. So the kind of main take-home message here is to focus on getting the water balance right, getting the water in. And if you feed a balanced diet with the right amount of sodium, potassium and chloride in for dogs, then they can actually use their homeostasis, so their internal mechanisms to keep the ratios right and exactly where they need to be in the body. So there's that, there are sort of two key things, is not to get too hung up on replacing the electrolytes or making them sure they're, you know, pre-race they have too many electrolytes or anything like that. We need to get a balanced diet and water in, and actually the body will pretty much do the rest. So, okay, that's a bit of theory done. Let's have a think about the practicalities of all that. And, you know, there was lots of questions, wasn't there? You know, how and when do I feed my dog, and what, you know, offer water and when. So as I said before, if the diet is balanced, then offer water first and foremost in terms of trying to hydrate your dog. Now, we want to start a race or a run, it doesn't have to be a race or a run, when we're in the most sort of hydrated state that we could possibly be. We don't want to start off, you know, not having had a drink all night. So we want to encourage them to drink, and by baiting the water, so putting something that's really palatable into the water, that can increase the amount, that's been proved actually with research to increase the amount of water that dogs will drink, because they don't know that we can, you know, we can say to ourselves, right, we need to have 3 litres this morning because I've got a race today, but you can offer your dog to drink and you can't make it drink. If it's not thirsty, it's not going to be doing that. So by making it more palatable, we can increase the amount of fluids that they'll take in. So we can do that with, well, broth is something that we really recommend to use. It's something that we'll share how to make a good bone broth. It's basically slow cooking some bones in water, and it's so palatable. The dogs go mad for it when you make it at home. And we want it to be quite dilute. So if you add in, you know, we don't want to just drink pure broth, because that's quite concentrated and does actually contain quite a lot of electrolytes. So just putting in half and half or a quarter broth with 3/4 of water in a bowl, and that should really increase the amount that they drink. So that's a really good tip. You can do things when you're away, like freeze broth in ice cubes and then dissolve that into their, not dissolve it, melt it into their bowl, and that should encourage them to drink. And timing wise, so we really want to make sure we're not running with huge amounts of fluid in our stomachs. So 2 hours before is really the last time before a run that you want the dog to take on a huge amount of water. They can have a small amount just to lubricate the mouth, literally half an hour before, but you've got to really control that. And I know there was a lot of questions about bloat, and that is definitely one of the factors that can cause bloat, is to have, you know, a large amount of fluid, air or food in the stomach. So 2 hours for drinking is, you know, is really when we need to really start thinking, right, okay, this is the last big drink now before we go. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to get them in that, you know, top kind of hydration before you start going out. And then, so how about post-race? So again, I remember there was a couple of comments on there about people's dogs not wanting to drink, and I can totally relate to that, because I know when I've just done walks and things with my, you know, with my family in the summer, and you've not taken water, and I'm like kind of paranoid, where's a river that the dog can drink? It's something that, you know, I'm very mindful of. But again, as a conversation with Kushla was interesting to discuss with her about how important it is that we offer water when the time is right. So going back to knowing your dog. It's about getting the dog down off adrenaline and back down to kind of resting rate, and then that's the best time for them to start taking water in. I don't know if any of you have been in or around kind of the horse industry, horse racing or competing, but actually the cool down and the offering of water post race, I mean, it's a science. So they might finish a race and you'll have 3 grooms appear, and it's all about getting that heart rate back to normal, getting the body temperature. It's all measured. You know, there's huge science and research into that, because you know, that is super important to maintain health and to stop them from, you know, really kind of deteriorating post-race, really. So I don't know if you remember the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, back to biology GCSE again. But when your dog's sympathetic nervous system is triggered, that's when it's kind of on adrenaline, and the muscles and the heart, that's where the blood circulation is concentrating on. And the parasympathetic is when the circulation is concentrating on digesting, and the blood flow is kind of diverted to the digestive system. And when your dog's sympathetic nervous system is triggered and on off and running, then, you know, taking water isn't something that's going to be kind of triggered in their brain, and also isn't really the right time. We really want to be taking it on when everything is coming back to normal. So getting a cool down sort of procedure is super important. So, and that just means once you've finished, keep walking, keep the dog walking, keep moving, you know, until the respiratory rates come back to normal. And you, Krishna was saying that when she's finished her race, you know, there's no way, and much respect to all of you, there's not much way that you can then suddenly start taking the dog for a walk. You know, have some extra hands, have someone to help you, so you can collapse on the floor and sort yourself out, and hand the dog over to someone with fresh legs that can concentrate on getting the dog, you know, recovered. A really kind of relevant point here is that you should really only be exercising your dog for the length, or, you know, the time that's appropriate for the dog's fitness, because the more appropriate that is, the quicker it will come back to everything coming back to the normal state again. So the quicker the parasympathetic system can kick in, and you can get hydrating, the temperature will come back to normal, the respiratory rate will come back to normal. It's the quicker the recovery, really. So exercising and running lengths for that are appropriate for your dog. So we might, you know, start and be really, really keen, but we have to build up very slowly, just as you would for yourselves. So, and that's really relevant, because I think post-race is the time where we see the most sort of bloat, and I think that this is pretty key. If we look at the horse industry, that's certainly when we see lots of colicky issues with horses, and, you know, it's a really important time, so please don't overlook that. Okay, so we've pretty much covered water there. So let's look a little bit now into food. Now this is, as I say, huge topic, so I'm going to be quite basic with this to start with, but I'm hoping that you'll come away with some kind of, probably some more questions, but a bit of a clue as to what you need to be looking for. So the 3 nutrients that dogs can eat that provide energy are carbohydrates, protein and fats, and we're just going to concentrate on those for today. We're not going to look at the sort of vitamins and antioxidants and that side of things, because that's a whole other talk, but I'm just going to concentrate on these 3. And that's sort of the amount of each of those that you feed it will change depending on the type of exercise that you're doing. So we categorize exercise into 3 phases. So the first one is sprinting. This is your typical greyhound racing. So this is anything less than 2 minutes. I mean, that for me would be a run. And it wouldn't be a sprint, it would be a fast walk. So very quick. And these dogs have a different energy need, or from a different energy source, than anyone doing more than literally 5 minutes running, which is classed as intermediate. And, you know, that's sort of a few minutes to maybe 3 hours worth of running. And then we're talking endurance when you go sort of 3 hours and over. So, you know, really long time. And what we're looking for in these diets really is that they become more energy dense. So we need to provide more energy per mouthful, or more calories per mouthful. So a carrot compared to a chocolate bar sort of situation, you know, you want more calories per bite than you do with a carrot in this situation. So yeah, I want to just explain the whole glucose metabolism first, just to get you thinking. So I don't know if any of you have done like a Atkinson's or a keto diet, but if you have, you'll have a bit of a clue of what I'm talking about. So the body kind of works and gets energy from its food in two very different gears. So the first one, which we're going to look at, is kind of the glucose route, which is glucose is sugar, but it's a breakdown product of a lot of carbohydrates and starches. And in animals or pet foods, we see these in sort of plant-based foods. So, you know, maize, wheat, that kind of thing. And this is a study done on people, and it's an extreme explanation of this situation because it's using glucose water, but it just demonstrates really nicely what we're trying to achieve with endurance runners. So you can see by the red chart what's happening here at the beginning is this is a person, a cyclist, I think, and he was given, the person with the red line was given like an energy drink full of sugar, and the blue line, they were just given a normal drink. So what happens with glucose is that it spikes. So you drink it in or you eat it, and it causes your blood glucose to raise, okay? And that's great. And that's what we kind of think, yeah, we need energy to run. But when the body has glucose, it stimulates the pancreas to secrete insulin. And then what insulin does is it says to all the cells in your body, oh, guys, there's loads of glucose, so come on in. So it takes all the glucose out of the circulation and into the cells. And then what happens is your blood glucose drops because which it should be doing, because your body's trying to keep it within a certain limit, and the glucose is doing its job in the cells and everything's great. But if at that moment you start exercising and your body is relying on carbohydrates and glucose as a fuel, your blood glucose will drop really quite low. And actually what we're trying to achieve is what we see in the blue picture is like a really, really steady kind of blood glucose. So if you're asking your dog to do exercise for more than half an hour, you're relying on carbohydrates or glucose as the energy source, you're going to see this kind of peak and drop if you're feeding a carbohydrate-based diet at kind of inappropriate time. And actually that can be, you know, you're not going to be able to perform, you're not going to be able to perform for any period of time with a blood glucose of, you know, pretty low, like 2 is pretty low. So it's just about, I want you to think about how the body uses these fuels. And if you use fat or protein as your energy source, you don't get this peak and this trough, which we'll talk about each one in turn, but it's just something to think about. So for yourselves as well, I know that my son plays football, and when he does football tournaments, only on football tournaments when it's all day, the coach brings along his glucose drinks, which is completely the opposite to what he needs, because he's getting these highs but then these lows because of the insulin in his body using up the glucose, and actually he doesn't, he shouldn't be having that at all. Just water would maintain it. So hopefully that explains a little bit about how carbohydrate metabolism works. So looking a bit more at carbs, they do provide energy. They provide about 4 calories per gram, so they're not particularly calorie dense. So they can be beneficial for sprinters. So going back to that previous picture or diagram, if you're doing a short burst of exercise, you would like some glucose in your body to fuel for that really, really quick period of time, but not if you're doing any longer than those sort of first few minutes. And to just make a point here, because I remember someone talking about carb loading, or there was a question about, should I carb load my sort of animal up before? And I know that's a concept that, again, human athletes use, and that's not at all relevant or as a recommended thing for our dogs. So forget that as a way of feeding. And carbohydrates is a large term because it includes fiber under kind of the bracket of carbohydrates. So some carbohydrates are usable, and some of them just act as fiber, insoluble fiber, and sit in the digestive system. And that does have a role. So not all carbohydrates are bad, but you need to think about, again, if your dog has that kind of stressy diarrhea that we were talking about earlier, when they get excited, then some fiber might be beneficial in their diet. It might help firm up the stools, but fiber is quite different because it's not being broken down. It's just literally sitting there and traveling through the digestive system. That's quite different to the kind of carbohydrates that fuel you with glucose. and to look out on your pet food labels for kind of better quality carbohydrates. So we want carbohydrates or cereals and things that have a better kind of protein ratio with them. So something like wild rice, anything really that's less kind of genetically modified. So maize and things you want to keep away from tend to be better. So overall, for carbohydrates, the most kind of maximum you would really like, we would really ideally like to see in our dogs' foods that are doing endurance running, is about 15% of our calories coming from carbohydrates. And this is a really individual, so I'm trying to give everyone a bit of a guide, but it depends if your dog does have diarrhea a lot or not, but just to be mindful that that as a maximum, about 15% of our calories want to come from carbohydrates. So that was carbohydrates. Let's have a look at fat. So fat is much more energy dense than carbs. It provides twice as much, as calories per gram. So 9 calories per gram instead of about 4 that carbohydrates bring. So for every mouthful of fat, you're getting double the calories. So for those people that were talking about keeping condition on their animals, and keeping the calories in when they're working hard, fat is a really good way of getting in the energy, and it's absolutely the preferred source for intermediate and endurance dogs. It's well documented that in sled dogs again particularly, that the preferred energy source is from fat, and so we're not using that carbohydrate way of metabolizing glucose for energy at all. So when you use fat, you'll have fatty acids circulating in your blood, and you'll also have the fat that you're carrying around, and your dogs break down that fat and use it as energy rather than having anything to do with the glucose and the carbohydrates. The fat just doesn't provide energy, it provides fatty acids, and they help repair and mop up what we call oxidative stress. This, I don't know if this is something you've come across, but when muscles work, they produce oxidation. Oxidation is like a byproduct of muscles working. I don't know if you can hear the hail.
Snow on the roof.
Sorry, if you can hear the pitter-patter of the hail outside. So yes, it produces, and it's a normal function, and oxidation, again, it goes back to GCSE chemistry this time probably, but and as a consequence of that, we have free radicals. So these are like particles around our bloodstream that are a bit unstable, and they cause disease. That's well documented that they are, and you've probably heard of it with face creams. So we use antioxidants in our face creams to stop aging. And so what we need to look at and be really careful with is when we're working those muscles really hard, the amount of oxidation that our body produces actually becomes a bit too much, and there isn't enough of the antioxidants to mop up all those free radicals, and that can cause real stress. And so we need to help the body to get rid of that oxidation. So that can be, again, fatty acids, or we can add antioxidants into the food, which is a whole other talk. But just to be aware that fat really helps kind of mop up the oxidative stress that's produced by the muscles. So it's not just about providing energy, it has other functions as well. And again, there's been some research done on sled dogs that there was absolutely a direct relationship or correlation found that between the fat content in the diet and the performance time of the dogs. So they performed better with more fat in their diets. So the current thinking is that between sort of 50 and 75% of calories should come from fat in these dogs, and that's the intermediate to endurance range if we go back to how we categorize them. So this is absolutely the way forward. So how about protein? So protein provides about the same as carbs, so 4 calories per gram, and absolutely when we start running our dogs, we are increasing the requirement of protein, but it is the absolutely least preferred source of energy. So when dogs start using protein for energy, they're actually having to break down their own muscles, and we don't want that. We want strong, healthy dogs that have got power and energy in their muscles. So if they're having to start break down the protein in their muscles, we're not really feeding enough fats, basically. It's super important to have a good quality protein in there. And I've put these pictures on here, which you might think are a bit random, but having worked in the pet food industry for a few years, and I know Vicky's experienced this as well, You know, Vicky was called up and asked if she would like chicken feathers.
Oh, actually, would I like some chicken protein?
They weren't that open about it. Would you like some chicken protein? And they were like, well, you know, in what form, and were offered feathers. And we had it more recently as well, when it was one of the kind of options, you know, for your chicken ingredient was to use feathers. And, you know, protein can come from maize as well. And this just isn't a complete protein for dogs. So dogs have to work really hard to get the protein they need out of maize. So the lovely muscle meat that I've got there, that contains a complete set of what we call amino acids. So the kind of break down the building blocks of protein, if you like. So if you feed muscle meat, your dog breaks down the muscle into the amino acids, absorbs it, and puts it straight back on as muscle. If you feed protein, maize as your protein source, the body has to break down. Well, first of all, it can't get to the protein because it's covered in cellulose in a plant cell. But if that process is done through the preparation, the dog absorbs the protein and the amino acids. He's then got to manufacture himself the amino acids to go back on as muscle. So it's a lot more involved, a lot more energy demanding. It's what we call less biologically appropriate or less bioavailable source of protein. So quality is really essential, and we want your dogs to be able to repair their muscles and get themselves back up to top conditions. So it's not just about amounts of protein, it's about quality of protein as well. So we are looking at about 30 to 40% of our calories coming from protein. So it's really important that it's in there. It's really important that it's a good quality, but we're not using it for energy. It's basically the take-home message of that one. So hopefully you're all sitting there now going, oh, I don't know what my bag's got in it. I'm going to go and have a look. So after this is over, it'd be really interesting for you to go and have a look and see where your dog's diet is at. But before you do that, we need to really understand your labels, because this can be super misleading. So there's three kind of main parts on a label that you need to be able to identify. So the first one is the ingredients. And so I've got two examples here. So the blue picture, is a well-known dry dog food. And if you look at the composition, so composition ingredients are the same thing. You have to list the ingredients in order of quantity. So your first ingredient, thank you, is the most biggest quantity. So the blue label here has got cereals as its first ingredient. And then we have meat and animal derivatives, I think, as the next one. Thank you. And then I can't see it because I'm over it. You know what I mean? Myself. Meat and animal derivatives. And then vegetable protein is the third. So you can see here, I mean, meat and animal derivatives is like a generic term. So they can basically put any type of meat from anywhere. So or not meat. Or yeah. So that's probably likely to be your chicken feathers. So you've got cereals, chicken feathers, and vegetable protein as your first three ingredients. And with the pink one here, we have the first three ingredients. We've got turkey meat, which was going to come with fat. So that's protein and fat, 80%, with some bone, offal as well, which brings lots of micronutrients, and then vegetables. So you can already see the difference, I hope, there in terms of quality. And also, another interesting thing to do is to look through that ingredients and composition list and ask yourself, is this actually food? So a lot of those lists contain words that we don't recognise as food. So if it isn't grown, or it's not something that you would be able to buy and eat yourself quite naturally, then you have to ask yourself a bit about the quantity, the quality of the food. And then moving on to the next one, which again is a real red herring. So the analytical constituents. So if you look at the protein content of the blue label, I think it's 25%. And then you look at the pink one and we've got 15%. So you go, oh, this has got more protein. And I think it's got more fat as well. This is 12%. Yeah. So you'd say, okay, this has got more protein and fat. This is brilliant. But it isn't at all. So we need to first of all put that into dry matter, because the hug label there has got 70% moisture, whereas the other one's 18% moisture. So that's going to throw everything out. You have to take the moisture out and convert it into dry matter. And again, it's about quality. So actually you don't need to have, you know, a huge amount of protein if you've got enough to cover. It's much more bioavailable. So the dog can use like 97% of a whole food dog food, does that make sense? Where and it's only able to kind of actually absorb and utilize about 70% of a dry cereal based dog food. So, you know, it's much more kind of concentrated and nutritious. So hopefully that'll give you a bit of a hint of the first couple of things to look for. And then again, talking of words and names that you don't recognize, looking at the additives. So any food that isn't particularly species appropriate will need to be rebalanced, and you need to add in some supplements basically to get it back to be balanced again. And we want these to be the most bioavailable, so and the most natural source possible, so the dog can utilize it, again going back to kind of 90% rather than the 70%. You know, some supplements are really difficult for the dog to get at, like such as 30% and stuff. So, you know, we need to kind of make sure and ask your dog food company. They absolutely should know, you know, is that a natural source of vitamin E? So just having a little look and asking yourself, actually, what is this? Is a really good way of understanding the quality of your dog feed. So to kind of bring that all together, the kind of ideal situation that we're looking at here for our dogs that are running sort of intermediate and endurance lengths is that this is basically trying to show you where our nutrients, our energy should be coming from in those 3 macronutrients. So at least half should be coming from fat, with protein being kind of second most demanding sort of energy source, and carbohydrates being the least kind of factor in there. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a visual clue and a summary of what we've just been talking about. And I've given you a couple of examples here, so just to kind of show you, again, marketing can be super misleading in this industry, and I've taken on the left like a classic raw diet, which is sort of the 80-10-10 principle, which might mean something to some of you, and if you can see that the majority of the calories are coming from fat, just as we need, and we've got the protein there as the second kind of demanding energy producing nutrient, and then carbohydrate being the lowest. There's a nice amount in there to bring some fiber, and then I've taken actually not a poor quality at all, a very kind of famous, if you like, well-known dog food, which is marketed as, yeah, it's not cheap, marketed as for working dogs, and done the same process. And you can see that the majority of the energy is coming from carbs there, fat second, and the protein is just the third one there. So it's just an interesting way to yeah, it was actually a surprise to me, to be honest, because it comes across, you know, they come across as really well suitable for these dogs. But, you know, and the gun dog industry is one that people have these really bad issues with, something called hypoglycemia, where they have the drops in glucose. It's a well-known syndrome in working dogs, and this food is marketed at kind of working gun dogs, and so I expected it to be a little bit more as we need it to be, and it wasn't. So yeah, and I can offer, if you wanted to kind of have a look or a review of what your pet food is, I can do that for you, and we've got set it up through Hug's website, where you can apply and fill in a questionnaire for me to just have a look and a review of what your current diet is and how that fits in. And, you know, I totally appreciate that raw isn't for everybody, but there some things that we can add to your food to make it a little bit more like the picture on the left there. So just to add in the fat, or just to improve the quality, you know, within your budget. So there are options. So that's kind of hopefully helped you, or got you thinking at least about what you're feeding your dog and where we need to be. And I know this is really, really common questions about when to feed. So it does depend on the individual, because it depends on what you're feeding. Now, hopefully you'll understand a bit more as to how relevant the times are. But here are some general rules for you to kind of take away. So the sprint activity, so any meal actually for any dog doing any kind of exercise, and this is relevant to you, we don't want to be feeding any more than sort of nearer 4 hours off of starting to run. And this goes back to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. So when the food sits in the stomach for about 4 hours, and we need a dog to concentrate on digesting its food at that moment. So we want all the blood and the circulation to be concentrating on digesting, and the stomach will empty within about 4 hours. So in terms of bloat, actually that gives us a really good time to start moving. So that's for every kind of running that you're doing. But if you are sprinting, then they can have some carbohydrate-based snacks about half an hour before. And if you're doing intermediate running, so 10k and less, you shouldn't need to be snacking or anything during. They should absolutely be able to cope fine. And especially if you are feeding a protein and a fat-based diet, you're not having to snack to keep up the blood glucose. If you're feeding cereal, you will have to be thinking about keeping the glucose, topped up, because that's the gear that they're in to fuel their bodies. But if you're in the kind of keto gear, so the protein and the fat way of feeding, then actually snacking doesn't become so relevant. And there's a real research actually in people. There's a talk by somebody, Nayas, it's not online yet, but it'll be available soon, that the Royal Feeding Vets Society did, about the benefits of fasting. And actually, there is no reason why you can't run on a fast, a dog that hasn't eaten since the night before, if you're using fat and protein as your kind of your fuel. Thank you. Yeah. If you're doing, some of you guys, I've seen things where you're doing these incredible races, and you literally will have to get energy into your dogs, because otherwise they'll start to lose condition. Then you can be giving very, very small amounts, and I mean really small, during breaks, etc., of fat and protein based snacks. And we've put some recipes together for you for perfect kind of toppers, if you like, and to carry around while you're running, and that will just help them keep topped up, because some of the races are outstanding in my opinion, and they go on and on and on. So you do need to kind of keep something going in those dogs, literally. So yeah, we have an answer for you there with what you can feed them. And then post-race, again, it comes back to what we were talking about before. So don't worry about getting the food in really quickly. I think, again, this is going to be one of the biggest bloat triggers, is if they eat too quickly. And I can understand and feel the need, especially after one of those ultras, to get some food in. But get them back to resting rate first, and then think about it. So it might be an hour, it might be some snacks. We've got a great little recipe available, sort of what they bounty bars.
Yes, that's for you and your dog.
You and your
so
dog
you
to
can share.
So they're kind of coconut based, and you can bake it, and they're delicious. We had them for breakfast, didn't we, the other morning? And they're great little snacks for the car. But yeah, just you don't go for a whole meal, as soon as you've finished at all. Get the dog cooled down, and get back home if you can, if it's an hour or whatever away. So yeah, just when you're thinking about trying to building your dog back up, or helping your dog recover, just focus on getting all the rates back down to where they need to be, and then you've got your dog in a state where it can digest properly, and hopefully we can avoid these sort of bloat incidents that we keep seeing. So that's pretty much a whirlwind. I don't know how on earth I've done for time there. A whiz through some of the basics. And it's really the tip of the iceberg there, but I just wanted you to think about and realise how important hydration is, which hopefully I hope you do now, and also just start to think about how you're fueling your particular dogs, and what the kind of ideal is, and we can go on another time and talk about supplementing and antioxidants and how important they are for these dogs. And how digestible it needs to be. That's another thing actually, just to mention, is that before, you know, we don't want them to be carrying around a lot of bulk. So vegetables and bone and high cereal is quite heavy for them to carry. So you want to be feeding them a really high digestible diet, and it has to be balanced at the end of the day as well. So there's lots and lots and lots more to talk about.
Hopefully you've got the building blocks today.
Yeah, it's a bit of a whirlwind tour. So yeah, I don't know if there's any questions that we need to answer.
We have some questions from the Facebook group. Thank you very much. And I know something that just recently people said, we've talked a little bit about bloat, haven't we? And the worries about that. And obviously from our perspective as well, we're very keen to be able to support and advise anybody, because obviously our business is feeding dogs. So we've looked at it in quite a lot of detail just to see whether there's any evidence to say, you know, you're more inclined to your dog's going to suffer from bloat if you feed a dry diet versus a raw diet, or is there an ingredient that triggers it, or is it a lifestyle thing? And I think we've found some evidence. We have a lot of hearsay.
It's a really tricky one, this, and it's really inconclusive and actually quite contradictory when you sit and read the research. So obviously deep-chested dogs are more prone to it, so the anatomy of your dog is going to make a huge difference. Taking on large amounts of water and large amounts of food, especially while panting, where you're taking in air. But we also, there's a great piece of research that I discovered which really shows a correlation between dry diets and wet diets. So if you are feeding a purely dried diet, that does increase the likelihood that your dog will suffer from bloat. So even if you just soak your dry food, you're going to be reducing the risk of that happening. So yeah, and it's so awful. And I've, you know, as a nurse, I've had to deal with it.
It's devastating, isn't it?
It's you know, and shocking, and it comes on and it's painful and it's horrible. So it's definitely something we want to avoid.
And definitely the other thing we saw in terms of ingredients was an issue with maize as well, which is why there's probably a lot of dog foods now that are saying that there's no maize involved. And there was some research that just showed that once maize was introduced into foods, the incidences of bloat increased over 1,000%. So again, you know, it's just trying to look at all the different factors. So if you can steer clear of maize, then that might be something else to think about. There was quite a few questions about dogs not holding their weight or not being particularly good eaters, but hopefully some of the information we've given tonight will help if you can aim the diet more down a protein and fat.
Yeah, so it's about, I mean, it's such an individual question, so it's really difficult to answer that generally, and it does just depend on what you're feeding them. Every mouthful, if you've got a picky eater or a dog that's not that food motivated, every mouthful needs to be as nutritious as possible and energy dense as possible. So looking at that, making sure you've got the best quality. And in terms of some dogs that, you know, might not be are a good weight, and then you're asking them to run and they're losing a bit of kind of condition, then you just need to basically increase the fats. And you can, you know, even if you're simply adding some coconut oil to your food, you know, that's just a simple way of getting some calories.
Or putting a
raw egg, which
on
is
top of the food.
There's ways that you can really kind of just supplement and top up what you're doing. But what I would love to do in those, you know, a couple of those I saw, I'd love to kind of know what are they feeding, and can we kind of nudge that to a slightly more, you know, appropriate way. Hopefully now you really see that, you know, these dogs do need to have kind of a slightly different makeup in their diet than a kind of sedentary, you know, chihuahua.
But it's interesting as well that dogs, like humans, every dog is different. So some dogs are nervy, some dogs are lazy, you know, some will kind of, you know, just within the same, and then you've got cross breeds, and you know, some, I feed one of mine a tiny amount of the proportion of food he should have, and he's, you know, I'm trying to keep the weight off him, and the other one I try and spoon feed him to get more food into him, and you know, it's about knowing your dog, and it's about, you know, looking at what his lifestyle is and what he does, and
you know,
like that.
Without sounding like a salesperson, but that's what we've tried to do with our cookable raw. So, you know, for some people, like, I feel like when I was writing this tonight, I was really mindful that raw comes with a lot of you know, for some people they just don't want to do it. There's a lot of concerns around it, and we totally get that. And just because, you know, you basically, what we've tried to produce at Hug is that you don't have to go with the bones and the raw meat. If you're not comfortable with that, there are kind of whole food cookable options which give you all the nutrition without some of the risks that you might be concerned. So you can achieve that. You don't have to just be kibble to achieve what I've been saying, is, you know, what I'm trying to get.
And and I think also, again, going back to every dog is different. I've been in the raw food industry since 2009, and I have a dog that hates raw. You know, he would much rather have a cheese sandwich. You know, and you know, I've been on my hands and knees with, you know, spoon feeding him just because I'm desperate. He hasn't eaten for 24 hours. Now, he doesn't do much exercise. I shouldn't worry, but you know, as any, you want to nurture. I think that's the feeling. So I think what we're trying to do is, the whole point is to do what works for you. If we can share those building blocks of diet, you know, the best thing you can do is something that works for you, that doesn't create another stressful situation because you're panicking, the dog's not eating, the dog's going, why is she panicking? I'm not going to eat this. And it all goes into this hideous sort of, you know, ever decreasing circle. So it's about finding what works for you. Look, using your hands and eyes to make sure if your dog isn't eating the recommended amount of food, but looks cracking, is enjoying life, is performing and doing what you wanted to do, that's fine. You know, and if you are worried, like, stick an egg on, make him scrambled egg for breakfast or something, you know, it's okay. And I think that's the, have some confidence in you as being able to nurture
and
your
no
dog,
one knows your dog like you do, you know. So that's the other thing I always say to people, you know. And it's difficult, especially with the kind of social media, and everyone has an opinion and do things a different way, but just find out what works best for you in your individual. There's lots of options.
Guys, we're almost out of time. We've got to 6:30, and I just
we are dog food bores, aren't we? That's the problem. Really not. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. There's been some great comments already, but it's so helpful information to really understand this and what's best for our dogs. So thank you.
I find it really fascinating because a lot of the things that we might do or I might do, but I don't actually understand the science behind it, or actually the timing of it, or why I'm doing it. And that's what has been so useful, actually getting the science behind it as well. So it's been fabulous from that. This really is only the tip of the iceberg, isn't it, guys? We've been chatting through, because so many people have been asking about things like supplements and things like that, and we really would like to have another chat with you guys, because there's so many things that you are so knowledgeable about, like krill, which is such an amazing supplement.
Superfood.
And it is a superfood that you include, but it's fascinating to hear about it and the studies that have been done on it and the difference that kind of supplementation can make, but also the use of herbs and supplements. And it's something that so many people always ask about on the Facebook pages. You know, we're doing this. If I've got nutrition, but do I need to add more? Is there something else that I could be doing? So it'd be really great to have you guys back to do another talk on that as well. And hopefully.
And I think a good point on that is that, you know, the dog food industry is based on guidelines that are quite basic. You know, it's about maintaining life. It's not optimal. So there's a real talk there to have on optimal nutrition for your endurance dog, really, and how to just refine it. And, you know, because we're asking a lot of them, and they deserve it, basically.
Couldn't agree more, because we keep saying canine athletes, and that's exactly what they are. But, you know, please, if anybody would like to, we've got a link to the service that Katie's offering, which is a special price that Katie's actually put together for us as well. And so we've got a link on those to the website. So, you know, this is, sorry, Verity, you know more about that bit.
On the comments on this live feed, I've put the links on the discussion, so it's all there for you. And they very kindly as well put a couple of recipes for us for free, which are on the Trail Runners website. Once again, there's a link in the comment section, so just have a look at that.
These recipes are awesome. They are absolutely fabulous. And you know, we tried these, and oh my life, I've got the most, you know, I've got a husky that was glued to me walking to heel. Give me more. But please have those, and do, you know, Katie's offer, which she's done a very special Trail Runners offer for you as well. to have a look at your pet nutrition is pretty special. And I think that's something that, you know, a lot of people might find so useful.
Yeah, I look forward to doing that, because I say it's so individual that it's really hard to do a talk, so you have to be quite general. So it would be really nice to just, even if it's just taking a couple of steps towards being a bit more optimal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much.
I'm sure we'll get some more questions in.
Yeah, and also if people have got questions, you know, if they want to email hello@hug pet food as well. We are dog food bores. You know, we will talk about, and we talk about poo, we talk about all sorts. So, you know, please just pop us an email and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible.
Fab. And all those links we've got as well. So, you know, you can find those links from the Trail Runners website. So come on and have a look on those. And, you know, seriously, the recipes are just awesome. So you've got to get onto those, guys. Thank you so much. Verity,
Thanks a lot.
have I missed anything?
No, you haven't. Thanks again. We'll just say thank you all night because it was just brilliant.
Yeah, at the end.
Great. Lovely to see everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.